So could you give us a brief sketch of your life before becoming a Tuskegee Airman?
Well, yes, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but only lived in that area up through about third grade in school. And my father moved to the Middle West, and the rest of my growing up years were primarily Illinois, but 2.5 years in Iowa, and then back to Illinois, where I finished high school and entered college training. Well, I had to work a year to get enough money to get to college, but then and worked my way through. But we had a draft at that time too. Although because I was in college, the draft board wasn't calling me up. But I learned about the aviation program and was able to pass the exams to be a pilot. And finally was called up 1942 fall, October time frame to enter military pilot training as a cadet.
Wow. What was society like back then?
Say that again. What was what?
What was society like back then? Was there a lot of segregation?
Yes. Fortunately, my high school, up to the high school I was into in Ohio, was segregated because there was a large black population.
Oh.
Fortunately, in Illinois, although there are areas of segregation, like in the city of Chicago, but I was out west of Chicago, and the schools there weren't enough black families to have separate schools. And same way in Iowa, the 2.5 years of my high school training in Iowa was in mixed school. So it was, as I said, a mix. But of course, the segregation to be able to stop at any hotel or eat in any restaurant existed in all those locations.
So you found out about the Tuskegee program through a draft?
The other way I found out was part of the Army policy was saying, they couldn't use any black pilots because they didn't have black mechanics. So once the pressure was on and they finally decided, they authorized a unit called an experiment because they didn't think it was going to be successful. I learned about that because the mechanics training began at Chinook Field, ran to Illinois, and that was just 14 miles away from where I was in college training. So I was aware of taking place, but as I say, I applied for the pilot training and was successful in accomplishing that.
So what was training like at Tuskegee?
Well, the training was good. The flight training at that time included 4 phases: pre-flight training, which is an area where aircraft identification, code, weather things, non-flying things that they still needed to be aware of. And that was, as they call, pre-flight training. From that, they moved into primary, and that's in a small aircraft. So for me, it was PT-17 with an open cockpit and not a very powerful engine. And I say open cockpit, but you learn the basics of what flying was all about. And getting through that successfully, we went to what they call the basic phase, which now it's an aircraft with a closed cockpit, a few more instruments, and a few more different maneuvers. And the aircraft is a couple hundred more horsepower in the engine, so like about 450 horsepower engine. go in basic is successfully go. The final phase is what they call advanced training, and this is again an aircraft closed cockpit with more instruments too, and then you even learn more about the accomplishment aircraft and flying large formations, and you get into weather flying and all those things, but it's a kind of a building block process, and going through them all successfully, we were commissioned as second lieutenants and received our Army Air Corps Silver Wings for that, getting through that training. They said training was good, and we were able to meet the requirements. And the Army policy, if folks didn't think we were going to be successful.
So, what was the community off base like? Did you face any racial difficulties?
Well, yes, we had to be aware of course, they're in the South. If when you went to Montgomery or Atlanta to shop in the bigger stores and so on, you had restricted fountains, things you could do or not do, and we learned to deal. We had, of course, some of our cadets were also from the South, and they let us know, for those of us who hadn't experienced it, how to deal with it. And in other words, staying away from areas that would be sure to be trouble and that type of thing.
So the director of training at Tuskegee was Noel Parrish, am I correct?
Yes, not at first. He was there in the program, one of the instructors, and fortunately the gentleman that was the first commander wasn't very helpful. Well, he wanted policies that still kept segregation and so on, but fortunately Noel Parrish was moved up from operations to take command, and of course he didn't change segregation, but he believed in us having the opportunity in the training and did everything to make that successful.
So after you completed your training at Tuskegee, you were sent overseas, right?
Yes, well, Tuskegee was very crowded, and as the unit was formed, the 1st and 99th Pursuit Squadron, well, later they called them all fighter squadrons, the 99th completed their training in 42, but were finally sent overseas in spring of 43. But what they did was behind the 99th, and they were going to need replacements, and certainly training continued, and their experience dispelled the Army thought that it wouldn't be successful, so 3 additional fighter squadrons were trained, and that was more than Tuskegee Army Airfield could handle with the training continuing. And so we did our combat training at Selfridge Field in Michigan. And they had an auxiliary field, Lascota Army Airfield in northern Michigan, but that was a place where we less populated and not a lot of lake traffic where we could do gunnery out over Lake Michigan. Then in later years, although I never experienced it, although our gunnery work was out of Egnan Field in Florida, that's during the training, in advanced training, you do some gunnery work too. Ours was with the airfields in the Florida Panhandle. But then later they had another airfield along the East Coast where gunnery and that type of thing is done. But the home base, while things were still segregated, became Lockburn Air Base south of Columbus, Ohio. And even when training closed out in 1946, those of us still on active duty were assigned there at Lockburn Air Base until the Air Force, in their interest in need to integrate, closed that base in July of 1949.
Okay. Could you talk about your experience overseas in Italy?
Yes, well, we were prepared with all of the necessary support so that we could operate, and we were segregated overseas too. We did not move to 99th when they finally went over. Well, first of all, nobody wanted them. None of the white commanders wanted them. But even then, the Army finally sent them to North Africa, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group, but they never went to the same base location of the 33rd. They had their own airfield and all of their support to be able to operate when they were successful in doing that, although Colonel Momeyer didn't want them. And his recommendation was they needed to be assigned to patrol Liberia. Well, if you look at the map of Africa, see where Liberia is, it was a long way from the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the command of the 33rd recommendations, they actually had a hearing on that recommendation. But fortunately, I believe it was the commander. Anyway, they had a evaluation of the 99th, and their result of review found that their performance was equal to the other fighter squadrons, and so they didn't follow Momana's recommendation. 99th stayed in combat, and they moved out of North Africa into Sicily, out of Sicily into Italy. And you might say it was a little bit of integration when they did that, because they were attached to the 79th Fighter Group. Colonel Bates was just glad to have more pilots and more aircraft to do the job. And the 99th was very successful in their performance. In fact, they shot down several German aircraft during the Anzio beachhead time frame, and again, dispelled the comments of the command of the 33rd's idea that they weren't aggressive, and that was another one that their performance helped change. But training had continued, and 3 other fighter squadrons were trained with their support, and it became the 332nd Fighter Group. And we went directly to Italy. At the same time, the 99th was moving out of Sicily into Italy. We went directly to Italy and performed harbor patrol, coastal patrol for a period. But then the group, those 3 squadrons, 101st and 302nd, were they determined they needed escort for our bombers to reduce the losses. They thought we had enough guns on our B-17s and B-24s to protect them. It turned out not so against the German Air Force. And so they decided they would provide escort for the bombers so that would help reduce their losses. And 4 fighter groups were picked from 12th Air Force, 332nd being one of them, moving to 15th Air Force, still there in Italy, but moving to the Adriatic sea side of Italy, the eastern coast of Italy, and began the escort work first in P-47 fighters, and then the P-51 Mustang fighter, which turned out to be the best because of its speed, range, and altitude capability. It was the best of the aircraft for the task that we were assigned, escorting the B-17s and B-24s as they were knocking out Germany's war-making potential.
So, are there any missions that stick out in your memory?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Are there any missions in particular that you remember very well?
Oh, yes, there were days when weather may have kept us bombers or helped destroy war-making potential. We had fighter sweeps, we called them, but we were able to fly and catch a lot of. We probably destroyed more German aircraft on the ground because they were destroying their oil fields and building locations. We were able to. They weren't able to get in the air, but we destroyed many on the ground. They called them fighter sweeps. And then we also did some escort that was good, where the partisans in Yugoslavia protected a lot of the downed crewmen, and arrangements were made to go in and pick them up, even building a strip in mountain areas and keeping them out of sight of the Germans wherever they might be and getting them back home safely.
Were any of your friends ever shot down and taken prisoner?
You say that again?
Were any of your friends ever shot down and taken prisoner?
Yes, we had 30-some pilots.
Wow.
Were losses and became prisoners of war. Fortunately, the Germans treated them very well because they did follow the so-called Geneva Conventions. So although those camp being treated cell in locations that is not pleasant at all, but the circumstances under the German camps against the other military folks were nothing like happened out in Asia, where they didn't believe in the Geneva Convention, so prisoners were not treated humanely. I think it's a good word.
Would you say that the Germans were perhaps less racist than the Americans at that time?
Less what?
Would you say that the Germans were perhaps less racist than the Americans at that time?
No, I'm still not understanding one word you're saying there.
Okay.
Less what again?
Did the Germans treat the black soldiers better than the Americans did at the time?
Oh, no, the treatment was equal in the camps. In fact, in any of the overseas areas, the type of segregation we faced here in America because of color of skin did not exist overseas areas. In Germany or Italy or Spain, any of the areas, most of those countries, of course, they're proud of their ethnicity, but they treat others equally, so that the type of segregation, in fact, some white units wanted the Italians in the areas where we were to treat us differently, but that wasn't their way of doing it. That happened even in World War One. Some black here in America, the blacks were only in service roles, in those, dig ditches, cook food, drive vehicles, that type of thing. But nothing done in the tank operation and so on. But even in World War II, blacks performed in areas here at home. They weren't assigned at all, but they did very successfully under some of the overseas commanders and helped them in the war.
So during World War II, there was also the Double V campaign. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, that was started by one of the black newspapers that in their writing indicated that we Negroes were fighting two wars, if you will, victory for 1V, victory for over Germany and Hitlerism in Japan. And the second V was we were fighting for victory against racism here at home. And in the Tuskegee, now we call it Tuskegee Experience. We weren't called Tuskegee Airmen back then, even though all of our training took place in Tuskegee. That's just the name that's been attached to our experience well after the war. But there was, in the training at Tuskegee, a medium bomb program as well, 4 squadrons for the 477th Bomb Group medium. That's medium is because it was for the Mitchell B-25, which is a twin-engine bomber. The bigger bombers were all 4-engine. But the 477th was training to go to the Pacific. But that dropping the big bomb caused a big slowdown in training as the war changed. But one of the commanders at the base where 477th was being trained wanted to maintain segregation on the base. Even the Army regulation didn't authorize that separation. He wanted to restrict the trainees on his base from using facilities. In other words, he wanted to keep an officer club, a white officers club, and that type of thing. In the process of attempting to change that, 101 of the officers were arrested. They had tried to enter the club in small groups and were denied that opportunity. And Colonel Selway asked them to come in and read his regulation and sign a piece of paper that they would abide by it. And 101 refused to do that because it was contrary to Army regulations. And they were immediately shipped off from Freeman Field in Indiana to Godman Field, Kentucky, put behind barbed wire and fence lights and guards and all of that. But that brought about a hearing. And of course the hearing proved that Selway was wrong because he couldn't rewrite Army regulations. But the Army really didn't change their policy at the time, so they had while the war was winding down the Pacific, they had we called it a composite group, keeping a couple of the B-25 squadrons and reactivating the 99th, one of the fighter squadrons. And Godman Field was too small a location for the unit. They opened Lockburn Air Base, now Rickenbacker Air Base, near Columbus, Ohio, for keeping a segregated base. Even when I came home from overseas, I entered the training as an instructor down at Tuskegee in the twin-engine training. But when training ended completely and they closed Tuskegee Iron Airfield in 1946, we were all moved up to Lockburn Air Base in Columbus, Ohio. But and that segregation existed until the Air Force finally acted by closing Lockburn 1st of July in 1949. The change in attitude was highlighted too because in 1948, President Harry Truman issued an Executive Order 9981 mandating that all of the services needed to integrate. And I mentioned the Air Force led the way there in 49. The Army and Navy finally got fully on board during the Korean War time frame.
So, sorry that we're at school, but
Okay.
So in your opinion, what effect did the Tuskegee Airmen have on the civil rights movement?
Well, the idea that people should be treated based on their abilities and so on, rather than the color of their skin, was emphasizing, I'd say, our Air Force led our country in realizing that, because they had said they needed to use people based on training and experience and where needed, not the color of the skin. And they're not getting enough money to meet requirements to try to keep a segregated base open. And there we're speaking of Lockman. They said we need to integrate with this. They finally carried that mandate out, first leading the way in the 1st of July 1949. So you might say that our military led our country in that edict to provide equal access and equal opportunity for all, not just one phase of our society or one color. Of course, we're more diverse now than we were then, so it's still an important aspect of society, but it did take the civil rights action in the early 60s to get equal access and opportunity on hotels and motels and restaurants and that type of thing.
So, when you joined the Air Force, America treated blacks like second-class citizens. Why did you feel the need to fight for a country that treated you badly?
Well, we've raised, I'm sure others just as I was raised up to treat other people like you want to be treated and seek respect for your abilities and so on, that happenstance of birth. And so, it might say like in our family, it's our country too. This is where I was born, raised, educated, and so being a citizen of the country, felt that we could fight for it too.
So you felt a responsibility to fight for your own country?
Well, I think it is the freedoms that we all enjoy. The old saying, freedom doesn't come free. And it's too bad that we've lost a lot of lives in some of the wars we've been involved in. But we need to stay strong to keep those from happening on our soil, and hopefully one day we can do away with fighting to accomplish anything. But right now, circumstances are we need to stay strong to continue to protect the freedoms that we all enjoy.
Do you have any advice for today's youth?
Well, I do. I like to talk to youth, middle school youngsters. They realize we don't want to repeat what happened in the past, but we need to understand what has taken place and what it means to, as I say, preserve the freedoms and opportunities that exist in our country. But also, I put it, the 4 P's is what I call it. The first P is for perceive, and that is, dream your dreams, but while you're doing it, find out your talents and abilities that are meaningful when you have to move into the work world. And I always add to that hopefully you find something you enjoy doing, and have a talent in that area, because nothing worse than having to go to work every day, but for your livelihood, but disliking what you have to do. So the second P is prepare yourself, and by that, get a quality education. the technical areas, we call it technical areas, but the math, sciences, and engineering and things that are part of the quality of our whole society and that work well in supporting both military and commercial aviation, that type of thing. And then the third P is perform. And in this area, I say, always do your best, but also seek excellence in everything you do. Don't be satisfied with mediocrity. And the final P, perseverance, which I say came out of the Tuskegee Army experience, and that is don't let adverse circumstances be an excuse for not achieving.
That's great advice. And
Thank you.
is there anything else you would like to share or discuss that we have not talked about?
No, I don't think so. Appreciate the chance to share what I've seen and thinking.
It's been an honor to interview you, Mr. McGee. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. We wish you the best. And certainly, as you're putting things together, if you have another question or need a little clarification or something I said, you know how to get a hold of them.
Okay.
And so let me know how it goes. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great day.
You too. Bye now.
I'm pretty well. Okay, did you record?